storytellers, some of our new ones. And she's back visiting with us tonight from Michigan. So I know I won't embarrass her, but Marjorie Schaefer is sitting right back there. Welcome back, Marjorie. So glad to have you with us. All right, so let's get on to some storytelling. Our first teller tonight is Wallace Sheely. Now, Wallace has been with us a year now. He's celebrating his anniversary. He and his lovely wife right there beside him is Catherine. And they are, well, Wallace is from Asheville, but I get to claim him as a Flag Pond resident now because they live near me in Flag Pond. So now there's 3 of us from Flag Pond. So just giving you that foreshadowing there. Wallace is also our current webmaster, and he's putting on new paint, I say, on our website, making it more interactive, and it just takes a lot of brains and a lot of knowledge. And I'm just so glad that he's with the Guild, he and Catherine both. Now, what you need to know about him is that he was named the Southeast Boldface Liar Champion in 2013.
Whoa.
Wow. So this means that he tends to embellish the truth slightly. So tonight he's got a scary tale for us. I hope for those of you who are faint of heart, grab hold of your person sitting next to you and help me welcome to the stage Wallace Sheely.
Catherine and I have been exploring a lot lately. And we went out on a road trip the other day to Clinchport, Virginia. I wanted to photograph railroad trestles, and Catherine was looking to collect miner stories. But it didn't turn out quite the way we expected, because as we went down the Clinchport River Highway, we came to Clinchport, and on one side of the street was the 6 or 8 little houses that make up the town. It's a wide spot in the road. And on the other side of the road was the most enormous patch of kudzu I have ever seen. As I looked at the property, the first thing I saw was the little farm cabin. The kudzu wrapped around the columns, went over the banisters. It even came down over the roof of the house. You could almost not tell it was there. I'm not sure how any light got in at all. A little ways further down was a burgundy Malibu. A late model burgundy Malibu, not 2 or 3 years old, just parked there in amongst the kudzu. And the part that I found the strangest was a yellow school bus that looked almost like the kudzu had dragged it off the road. Now, when I see things like that, I've got to know what's happening. I can remember swinging on the kudzu when I was a kid from the vines, but I wanted to know what was happening here. So I got bold and I went up to the house and I knocked on the door. Now I could hear the whistling of a tea kettle in the background, and I thought I heard some voices, but nobody came to the door. So Catherine and I set off on the next step of our journey. We rode right across the street and did something we do on almost every road trip we go on. We stop for 2 bottles of Coke. The diet goes out the window and we share our Cokes. Now we walked into this mom and pop store and the lady behind the counter looked at us like, you know how they look at you when you're not from these parts and you don't belong? She said to me, have you been down to the Irwin place? That's Irwin with an I. I said, we don't know the Irwins. I don't know whether we've been down to the Irwin place or not. She said it was a place with all the kudzu. Well, about that time I reached up and I took a piece of kudzu out of my wife's hair and it fell to the ground. I said, I guess we have been to the Irwins. She said, it's dangerous there. You shouldn't go back. I said, I've got come right over here to the bulletin board. The most strange thing that ever happened in this place. And I've got the articles. Well, the first article was pretty ordinary. It was an obituary for a farmer, a Mr. Irwin. He had been driving his tractor down, clearing a field, and he got all wrapped up in the vines and turned the tractor over on himself and expired right on the spot. Now, his wife took up a battle against Kudzu like you would never believe from that moment on. She was in the paper articles for her flamethrower and her machete and her axe. She was going to beat that Kudzu one way or another. But I think Kudzu got the word. They sent signals down. They groaned in pain as she chopped with the machete or burned them. So they came up with a plan. The kudzu around the house grew denser and denser, and one night she went to bed, and she left the window just slightly open. And as she went to sleep, the kudzu slithered in through the window. The tendrils circled the bedpost, and the next thing you know, it was growing around her feet and up to her chest when she was awakened and wanted to scream out. But you know, only a very quiet sound came before she was smothered as the tendrils grew into her over her mouth and nose. A couple of days later, her friends came looking for her. They knocked on the door and there was no answer. They could hear the tea kettle whistling on the stove. Green tea, and as Catherine said, not from China. Eventually they got the key from under the mat and they went in. And there they found her, or so they thought, in the darkened room, sitting at the table sipping tea. They lit up a lantern and then they realized she wasn't there at all. All was there was the vines who had intertwined themselves into a perfect sculpture of the old woman, Mrs. Irwin. Her crepe skin had leaf prints all over it. The trunks of the vines were like the bones in her body, but there was no flesh there at all. They called the police, but no evidence of her actual body was ever found. Now, it wasn't but a couple of weeks later, you know, the high school kids get into these mystery kind of things. And so a young man and his girlfriend, Jimmy and Lizzie, were driving along when suddenly his Malibu started to putter. Out of gas, he said. We'll have to park. I mean, we'll have to stop the car right over here near the kudzu. Lizzie wasn't having any part of it. She said, I'm going to the farmhouse and I'm going to knock on the door and I'm going to get help. Well, she went down and she knocked on the door and she heard a voice. Come in. Help yourself to some tea. I'll be right there, dearie. So she went in and set herself down at the table, took the pot of tea and poured her some fresh, green, steaming tea. As her eyes began to adjust to the dark, she realized that the woman was sitting right there at the table with her. It just about scared her to death, but not as bad as when she realized the woman was entirely made out of vines. She got up to run out and bumped into Jimmy coming in the door from looking after the car. She fell and got tangled into the vines. Jimmy raced to the car to get a hatchet to cut her free. He didn't succeed, so he went back to the car for help. Now suddenly the car had gas. You have to worry about these teenagers when they don't have gas in the car. He tried to start the engine, but the axle and the engine block were full of kudzu. The next morning, his parents came looking for him. They found the car engulfed in kudzu, with only a pile of limbs and leaves on the seat, and a broken window where a branch had come in and dragged the body from the car. Lizzie's body was never found. A week or so later, maybe it was 2 weeks, it was about this time of the year, a school bus driver was driving his kids home. He had one last stop for the middle school students when he blew a tire, and he was barely managing to keep the bus on the road as it slid over the embankment and into the kudzu, which welcomed it with open branches. You know what he was trying to control the bus. Suddenly, 2 teenagers, high school kids, jumped up and started rushing the kids to the back of the bus. They were pushing palm prints on the back of them as the emergency door opened, and out they got. Little Bobby scraped himself and was bleeding as on one of the tendrils, one of the branches, one of the trunks. The athlete took his jersey off and wrapped it around, and then pushed Bobby out of the bus, the last kid off. Now, when help came, they said, "Where is the bus driver?" He was nowhere to be found. Where are the young couple that helped? They were nowhere to be found. But every kid got off of the bus safe. Except when they turned around, there were big green palm prints on each kid's back. And when they pushed them off the bus, 2 sets, one a little feminine and one clearly big and male, had pushed those kids off the bus. Now, I tell you this, when they unwrapped Bobby's arm and patched him up, the jersey with the green prints and Bobby's blood was a Rye Cove High School jersey, and it said number 16, Jimmy, and had a little heart at the bottom that said, "Love, Lizzie. I don't know about you, but I'm not going back to Clinchport anytime soon, because it scared me to death to think about what kudzu could do." A gift for you.
I ain't touching none of that.